Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back into a world where warmth wasn't just comfort, but survival itself. You're standing at the edge of a Viking longhouse in the dead of a Scandinavian winter. The air bites at your nose, each breath forming a little puff of fog that seems to vanish before it even gets the chance to rise. The roof looms low, the walls built of timber and packed turf, looking more like a mound of earth than a home. Inside, it's not exactly cozy, at least not yet. The first thing you notice when you slip through the heavy wooden door is that the cold follows you in, sliding around your boots, curling like invisible snakes along the dirt floor. You think you know cold from modern winters. Maybe you've shoveled a driveway or had your hands ache while scraping ice off a car. But in this place in this age, there's no thermostat, no heated blanket, no hot shower waiting to thaw you out. Here, if you don't prepare, you probably won't survive the night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moment you cross the threshold, your eyes adjust to dim light, glowing faintly from the central hearth. This longhouse is the beating heart of Viking domestic life, but on nights like these it feels more like a test of endurance. The first challenge isn't firewood or blankets, it's simply the air. Longhouses were built to trap warmth, but they were far from airtight. Cracks between the timbers, gaps where roof and wall met, all of it allowed icy drafts to sneak in. Imagine lying down after a long day of hauling nets or chopping wood, and suddenly that whisper of cold wind slips past your skin like a cat brushing against you in the dark. Yet somehow, people did more than just endure here. They laughed, they feasted, they raised children, and yes, they slept. If you press yourself against the rough wooden bench along the wall, you can feel how the cold clings at your back while a little pocket of warmth curls from the fire in the middle. Historians still argue whether these houses were unbearably smoky or surprisingly snug. But what's certain is that everyone inside had to think of cold as an enemy, one that returned every single night. Even as you stand near the door, you catch the smell of old wood smoke, animal dung tracked in from the pens outside, and the faint sharp tang of salted fish drying overhead. The longhouse is alive with warmth in patches, but still shadowed with icy drafts that sting your ankles. This isn't the kind of cold you shrug off, it's the kind that teaches you very quickly where to sit, how to breathe, and how close to huddle to whoever's beside you. And tonight, just like every other night in the Viking Age, you're about to find out exactly what it takes to sleep here without freezing to death. The first thing that grabs your attention when you move further inside the longhouse is the central hearth. It's more than just a fire, it's the lifeblood of the home. Smoke rises lazily from the shallow pit in the center of the floor, coiling toward the thatched roof and weaving around heavy timber beams. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, flickering over the rows of sleeping benches and the clutter of daily life. You step closer and the warmth hits you in waves, the kind that seeps into your boots and makes your fingers tingle. It's deceptive warmth, though fleeting if you stray too far. The Vikings designed their longhouses to make the most of this fire. The central placement allowed heat to radiate outward, reaching every corner if you were smart about where you positioned yourself. People slept in a rough circle around it, or on elevated bunks along the sides, using their bodies and shared blankets to trap the heat. Historians still argue whether these fires were ever truly efficient or if the smoke and drafts countered the warmth, but one thing's clear: no hearth meant no sleep. It's not just about survival, the hearth controlled life inside. You notice the meat hanging near the fire, drying and curring from the smoky air. Pots bubble with stews, and a little kid's cat-like whine reminds you that not everyone is enjoying the comfort equally. Interestingly, some fringe theories suggest that Vikings occasionally tossed herbs into the fire to ward off bad dreams or spirits. You can imagine the strange, pungent scents mixing with wood smoke, an olfactory chaos that becomes strangely comforting once your nose adjusts. As you observe, you notice a sort of choreography. Someone feeds the fire, another stirs a pot, while someone else sprawls across the bench, testing the boundaries of warmth. You can feel how the longhouse itself is a living organism, fire at the center, people and animals acting as radiators, walls and thatch roofs holding in as much heat as possible. And then the tiny details. The smoke curling past your ear, the occasional pop of a burning log, and that odd tickle in your throat from all the soot. These elements, mundane to a Viking, are now vivid lessons for you in how heat was generated and conserved. You start to notice how small behaviors matter. The person closest to the fire is warmest, but also the first to cough from smoke inhalation. Those on the fringes cluster with animals or family members, creating mini pockets of body heat. Some even wear layers into bed, knowing the night will demand it. And yes, the Vikings were resourceful, they recycled everything, even using leftover embers to warm bedding before crawling in. Moving your gaze to the walls, you realize that the longhouse isn't just a wooden box with a fire in the middle. It's a carefully engineered thermal puzzle. The timber skeleton is overlaid with thick turf, packed tightly to form walls that feel like they could swallow the cold whole. Step closer and you can see the subtle undulations of grass and soil, a living patchwork that insulates the longhouse against winter's bite. The Vikings didn't think in terms of R-values or modern insulation science, but they understood the principle intuitively. Thicker walls meant slower heat loss and more survival. Historians still argue whether turf walls alone were enough to maintain a livable interior temperature or if communal body heat was the true hero. As you press your hand to the wall, the surface is rough and slightly damp. Some fringe archaeologists have suggested that Vikings occasionally layered animal hair or moss inside the turf to improve insulation, a little-known hack that doubled as a vermin deterrent. You can almost imagine the sensory mix, the earthy smell of moss, the faint musk of hidden animals, and the lingering aroma of smoked fish from the hearth. This is the tactile reality that the romanticized image of Vikings rarely captures. They weren't lounging in pristine halls, they were surviving in layered, living walls that demanded respect. The thickness of these walls also shaped the layout of the interior. Windows were rare, and ventilation came almost exclusively through the smoke hole above the hearth. This meant shadows clung to corners and the room's temperature gradient could be dramatic. Near the fire, you're almost sweating. Near the far walls, goosebumps rise in rebellion. Fringe accounts even suggest that some longhouses had built-in niches filled with straw or animal pelts along the walls, microbeds that offered extra warmth to children or the elderly. You can imagine small bodies huddled there, tucked away in hidden pockets, while older teens or warriors claimed the benches closer to the fire. Walking along the wall, you notice the slight give under your hand. Turf isn't rigid. It flexes, breathes, and slowly releases moisture. That moisture paradoxically made the walls better at retaining heat, acting like a thermal sponge. But it also meant that sleeping near the edges required a keen eye for drafts and condensation. The Vikings mastered this by clustering activity zones and sleeping platforms strategically, always balancing comfort against the harsh truth of the outside cold. Even today, modern reenactors are baffled at how much warmth these walls could hold. They find themselves layering fur and straw, only to discover that the longhouse itself radiates a kind of passive heat, subtly supporting human body warmth. As you run your fingers over the rough turf, it's a reminder that Viking survival wasn't just about brute force or bravery. It was about observing, adapting, and making clever use of the raw materials around you. And in this moment, with the wind howling outside, you feel a deep appreciation for how the walls themselves were allies in the nightly battle against frostbite and shivers. Your eyes drift upward to the roof, and suddenly the longhouse feels like an entirely different environment. The thatched rafters loom low, woven from layers of straw and reeds that were surprisingly effective at keeping snow and rain at bay. Look closely and you can see the charred streaks from decades of smoke rising from the hearth below, a permanent patina that tells the story of countless nights of survival. The roof doesn't just protect from precipitation, it acts as insulation, trapping heat inside and allowing warm air to swirl slowly downward. Yet the smoke that sustains warmth comes with a price. It stings your eyes and throat, leaving a lingering haze that clings to hair and skin. Historians still argue whether longhouses were more tolerable due to the smoke's warmth or if it made the air nearly unbreathable, especially during the deepest winter nights. Interestingly, some fringe studies suggest that Vikings may have intentionally allowed small gaps in the thatch to vent smoke efficiently, balancing insulation with air quality, a primitive form of climate control. You can almost see it now, a careful craftsperson adjusting layers of straw, ensuring that the fire below doesn't suffocate everyone while also maximizing retained heat. You reach up and brush your fingers against the rough, golden fibers. They're brittle, slightly prickly, and still faintly warm from the lingering smoke. This is insulation you can touch, not just imagine. As your attention follows the beams, you notice the longhouse's ceiling height is surprisingly low. It encourages warm air to pool closer to where people sleep, but it also means the smoke lingers at eye level. You blink through it, feeling your lungs protest just enough to remind you that this was daily life for the Vikings. Fringe sources even suggest that certain herbs, like juniper or juniper resin, were tossed into the fire to minimize smoke irritation, adding a faintly resinous scent to the air. You can imagine the odd mix of odors, wood, smoke, herbs, and animal skins, creating a kind of olfactory armor against the bitter cold outside. Beyond insulation, the roof serves as a silent chronicle of the longhouse's history. Burn marks, soot streaks, and minor repairs hint at countless winters survived, nights when families huddled beneath these rafters while wind and snow battered the outside world. In modern reenactments, people are often amazed at how little daylight penetrates the interior and how cozy or claustrophobic it can feel depending on one's perspective. You notice that even small variations in thatching thickness can create microclimates within the house, warmer patches near dense straw layers, cooler corners beneath gaps. And then there's the sensory paradox. As you lean back and imagine yourself sleeping under this roof, the heat from the hearth mingles with the cool draft slipping from a poorly sealed corner. It's uncomfortable, but it's also alive. The roof doesn't just shelter, it participates in the rhythm of the longhouse, a living partner in the nightly fight against cold. You start to understand that warmth wasn't purely a function of fire. It was architecture, craft, and centuries of empirical knowledge blended seamlessly into wood, turf, and straw. And that realization, oddly, makes you feel just a bit safer as your eyes trace the smoky beams above, imagining the Vikings who had trusted these rafters for decades of brutal winters. As you shift your gaze back down, the real lesson of Viking longhouse survival hits. Space was shared in the most intimate way imaginable. Sleep wasn't a private affair, it was a communal endeavor, one where body heat became as crucial as blankets or walls. You trudge toward the long wooden benches lining the walls and notice how close together the sleeping platforms are. Families huddle side by side, sometimes 3 or 4 deep, pressed shoulder to shoulder, knees brushing, toes tucked against neighbors. It's a strange intimacy to imagine, especially for someone used to sprawling mattresses and personal space, but here, closeness equals survival. Historians still argue whether the benches were primarily for sleeping or multifunctional, also serving as seats, storage, and social space during the day. The benches are simple, rough-hewn planks elevated slightly above the cold dirt floor. You step onto one, feeling the slight wobble and the coarse texture underfoot. Fringe reconstructions suggest that people layered rushes, straw, or woven mats on top to soften the surface while adding an insulating buffer between body and wood. Kids often claim the edges, curling up like little hedgehogs, while adults stack themselves nearby, creating human radiators in the process. You can almost hear the low hum of breathing, murmured conversation, and occasional snore, all blending into a symphony of warmth. Crowding wasn't merely a matter of comfort, it was deliberate physics. By lying close, Vikings trapped small pockets of heated air, reducing the chill from drafts and frozen floors. You notice the subtle hierarchy of space: elders and heads of household near the fire, children and servants toward cooler corners. Fringe evidence even suggests that on especially harsh nights, animals like sheep or goats were allowed to sleep on the benches or on the floor beneath, further bolstering the warmth. Imagine the faint rustle of fur against skin, the low hum of an animal's breath, adding to the thermal orchestra of the longhouse. There's a surprising rhythm to it all. Families rotated positions, children squirmed, adults adjusted their cloaks and furs, constantly seeking comfort without losing heat. The narrow space forced cooperation, and you start to appreciate the subtle choreography. Leaning too far and you lose warmth, staying too close and you risk elbowing your neighbor. Modern experiments with reconstructed longhouses reveal just how efficient this communal strategy could be, often more effective than layered clothing alone. And then there's the sensory oddity, a mix of human warmth, damp furs, wood smoke, and the earthy smell of the turf floor. It's not unpleasant once you get used to it, but it is immersive in a way modern bedrooms never are. You probably won't survive this by simply imagining comfort. You need to respect the rhythm of the room, the push and pull of heat, the subtle negotiation of bodies seeking warmth. And as you settle onto the bench, nudged by the person next to you, the first lesson crystallizes. Survival in a Viking longhouse was not just about architecture or fire. It was about people pressed close, sharing warmth with no apologies. As your body begins to adjust to the clustered warmth of the sleeping benches, you notice another source of heat that's both practical and surprisingly affectionate: animals. Vikings didn't shoo their livestock out into the snow at night. In fact, goats, sheep, and even smaller cows were often allowed inside the longhouse to share the heat. You can almost hear the soft bleating of a goat as it nudges a child asleep in the corner, the gentle shuffle of hooves across the straw-laden floor. This wasn't just quirky behavior, it was a pragmatic solution to winter's cruelty. Historians still argue whether animals were primarily inside for warmth, companionship, or security against predators, but one thing's clear: these creatures became living radiators, distributing their body heat across the space. You step carefully past a sleeping sheep, feeling the warmth radiating off its woolly back. Fringe evidence from certain excavation sites even suggests that some families had specific animals assigned to particular people, your personal heater for the night, so to speak. There's something tender in imagining the interdependence. Humans sheltering animals during snowstorms, animals in turn sharing their heat, all of it part of the larger ecosystem of survival. The smell can be overwhelming at first, a pungent mixture of animal musk, damp straw, and the lingering tang of the hearth. Yet over time, it melds into the backdrop of what a Viking longhouse smelled like: life, survival, and practicality mixed into one dense, complex perfume. Animals weren't merely passive heaters, they influenced daily routines. Children had to avoid being pinned beneath the shifting weight of a sleeping goat. Adults adjusted their own positions to accommodate a cow lying close to the hearth, and the heat radiated unevenly, creating microclimates within the house. Fringe sources suggest that some longhouses even had small, raised wooden platforms where animals could rest without crushing smaller humans, maintaining a delicate balance between safety and warmth. You begin to understand that warmth wasn't just a physical phenomenon, it was a choreography of living beings, both human and animal, all negotiating their way through the night. This close association with animals also provided psychological comfort. Imagine a child falling asleep beside a docile sheep, the rhythm of its breathing synchronizing with their own. That shared warmth and gentle pressure creates a sense of safety, a tangible buffer against the icy darkness pressing outside. Modern reenactors who sleep with animals inside turf or timber reconstructions often remark that the sensation is unnervingly intimate yet remarkably soothing, a reminder that survival and comfort were never mutually exclusive. And of course, there's a subtle, almost comedic aspect to this arrangement. You nudge a goat accidentally and it groans, shifting in protest, while the person beside you curses quietly under their breath in the dim light. These minor disturbances were nightly rituals in their own right, quirks of longhouse life that combined frustration with necessity. By the time you settle down fully, you realize the animals are not just heat sources. They are an integral, breathing, occasionally inconvenient part of what kept Vikings alive through endless cold nights. With the rhythm of the longhouse beginning to feel almost natural, your attention shifts to another critical element of warmth: textiles. Wool, fur, and hides weren't mere luxury items. They were the difference between shivering through the night and sleeping with some degree of comfort. You run your hand over a stack of rough spun wool blankets and fur pelts, noting the textures, scratchy, heavy, and uneven, but remarkably effective at trapping heat. Vikings didn't have soft cotton or polyester. They relied on what nature and their skills provided. Historians still argue whether wool alone was enough to stave off frostbite in extreme conditions or if layering with furs was essential. The longhouse is a veritable tapestry of animal skins. Cowhides drape across benches, sheep's wool cushions children curled in corners, and hides from deer or elk provide top layers for adults sleeping near the fire. Fringe evidence even suggests that some families stitched together patchwork blankets from various furs, creating multifunctional insulation that could be rearranged depending on the night's temperature. You can almost see the subtle artistry, not just warmth but careful layering, weight distribution, and clever reuse of scraps. Each hide carries its own scent, subtly mixing with smoke, turf, and animal musk to create a dense, almost tangible atmosphere of survival. Clothing was equally vital. Vikings often slept fully dressed, in multiple layers of tunics, cloaks, and leggings, because pajamas simply didn't exist. The scratchy wool pressed against your skin is oddly comforting once you adjust to it, the heaviness locking in body heat as you settle into the bench. Fringe accounts even suggest that some used small bags of straw or moss tucked inside garments to add extra insulation or to dry out moisture from sweat during the day. You begin to realize that every item in the longhouse has a dual function: warmth and utility, survival intertwined with practicality. Layering was both art and necessity. You watch as adults adjust their cloaks around children, sometimes tucking smaller siblings under their own furs, sometimes wrapping up themselves to prevent heat loss. This shared layering strategy created concentric zones of warmth. Those closest to the hearth might rely more on fire heat, while those farther away depended almost entirely on fabric, bodies, and ingenuity. Modern experiments confirm that strategically layered textiles can raise perceived warmth by several degrees, a life-saving difference in sub-zero northern winters. And then there's the quirky reality. Wool and fur aren't exactly soft. Imagine pressing your face into a coarse, itchy sheepskin in the dim firelight, feeling every bristle while trying to drift off to sleep. Yet somehow Vikings made it work. They adapted, learned, and even took pride in crafting blankets and furs that were functional masterpieces. The sensory experience, weight, texture, scent, and temperature, is a living lesson in how humans bend comfort to necessity. By the time you nestle under a heavy wool blanket pressed against a fellow sleeper and a warm goat, it becomes clear. These textiles weren't mere accessories, they were vital shields against the relentless cold. You shift slightly under the heavy furs and blankets, noticing how the Vikings maximized every scrap of textile. Shared coverings weren't just economical, they were strategic. Families huddled under oversized cloaks, patchwork blankets, and layered furs, ensuring that no heat escaped unnecessarily. You realize that the warmth isn't just coming from the fire or the walls, but from the very human contact beneath these coverings. Children pressed between adults or other kids became little heaters, their bodies radiating life in measured doses that extended to the edges of the bench. Historians still argue how structured or spontaneous these arrangements were, whether families had established warmth hierarchies or simply huddled wherever space allowed. It's almost charming to watch the improvisation in action. Fringe reconstructions suggest that blankets and furs were sometimes tethered with cords or wooden pegs, creating quasi-tents within the longhouse. These miniature enclosures trapped small pockets of heat, keeping infants and elderly family members from freezing in draft-prone corners. You can imagine a child peeking out from a cocoon of blankets, eyes half-lidded against the smoke, feeling the reassuring presence of both human and animal warmth around them. Even today, reenactors marvel at how effectively shared coverings can raise the local temperature by several degrees without a single flicker of flame. There's a rhythm to sleeping under communal blankets that modern life rarely affords. Movement by one person sends ripples of warmth or sudden drafts through the covering, prompting subtle adjustments. Adults might shift slightly to cover a child, and everyone instinctively aligns with one another to maximize efficiency. Fringe accounts even suggest that in particularly harsh winters, some Vikings slept in pairs or small clusters for added thermal efficiency, creating a layered human and fur sandwich that would seem chaotic to outsiders but was a carefully honed survival technique. Beyond warmth, these shared coverings contributed to a sense of safety. Pressed together beneath heavy wool and animal skins, the longhouse sleepers formed a micro-community, a living network of heat and vigilance. Noise, whether a child whimpering or a goat shifting its weight, was absorbed and mitigated by layers of human and animal bodies. You start to notice the sensory interplay, the subtle heat of a neighbor's arm, the muffled crackle of embers, the scratchy pressure of wool across skin. It's intimate, pragmatic, and strangely reassuring. And there's the humorous reality. With so many people and animals pressed together, it's a wonder anyone slept at all without being elbowed, tripped over, or nudged awake by a goat. Yet somehow this chaotic system worked night after night. By the time you tuck your knees closer to a fellow sleeper and pull a patchwork blanket higher over your shoulders, the lesson is clear. In Viking longhouses, warmth was social, communal, and absolutely necessary for survival. And as you drift into the rhythm of shared body heat, you can't help but marvel at how inventive, stubborn, and cooperative these people had to be to sleep through the relentless cold. By now, you start to notice that warmth wasn't only a matter of furs or blankets, it was woven into the very routines of daily life. Viking survival relied on constant activity, even in winter, because idle bodies cooled quickly. You trudge through the longhouse, noticing someone chopping a small stack of firewood near the hearth, another stirring a pot of stew, and a child bouncing lightly in a corner to stay warm. These daily chores doubled as pre-sleep heat therapy, elevating body temperature before the night's long stretch on benches. Historians still argue whether such activities were purely practical or if they also served a social and psychological function, reinforcing community bonds while generating heat. Interestingly, fringe sources suggest that Vikings might have timed certain tasks to coincide with sleep preparation, almost like an early form of circadian temperature management. Chopping wood, cooking, or even weaving meant your muscles generated heat naturally, allowing you to crawl into bed already at a slightly elevated temperature. Imagine finishing your evening stew, shaking off the chill, and then pressing into the layered furs with fingers still tingling from work. The ritual was both practical and subtle, an unspoken code linking labor to comfort. The smoke-laden air plays a role here too. It stings your eyes at first, but the heat from the central hearth, combined with the movement of bodies, circulates warmth throughout the longhouse. Even standing still, you can feel pockets of warmer air shifting gently around you, pushed along by the collective presence of a dozen people and several animals. Fringe interpretations suggest that some Vikings even engaged in brief warming dances around the fire before sleep, spinning or stomping lightly to increase circulation. A quirky idea, but one that underscores the ingenious simplicity of their strategies. It's not just about individual effort, coordination matters. Adults take turns tending fires, stirring pots, or securing straw for beds. Children scamper around, often adding chaos to efficiency but inadvertently contributing to the overall warmth. The longhouse becomes a living organism, fire, bodies, and movement working in harmony to stave off frostbite. Modern reenactors have discovered that even a short burst of physical activity before bed can make an enormous difference in perceived warmth, which aligns with the historical intuition of these communities. And then there's the humor of the scene. You might bump into someone swinging a firewood stick, narrowly avoiding a misdirected elbow while a goat scuffles at your feet. Despite the chaos, it all contributes to survival. You begin to understand that Viking nights weren't just about enduring cold, they were about active, communal participation in the creation of warmth. In this environment, doing nothing was dangerous. Movement, no matter how mundane, was a matter of life and death, and every chore doubled as an act of survival ingenuity. Now, as your muscles start to relax from the evening's chores, your attention is drawn to the raised wooden platforms lining the longhouse walls. These benches aren't merely convenient, they're a vital strategy against the cold. Sleeping directly on the dirt floor was practically suicidal in winter. The ground siphoned heat relentlessly, turning even the coziest furs into frozen lumps by morning. By climbing onto these elevated bunks, Vikings created a small buffer zone between themselves and the frigid earth, letting warmth circulate more effectively around their bodies. Historians still argue whether these platforms were customarily built for each household member or if they were communal, multi-use structures that adapted to sleeping, sitting, and even storage. The platforms themselves are simple but surprisingly clever. Rough-hewn timber spans the length of the walls, sometimes reinforced with additional planks or supports to prevent sagging under multiple sleepers. Fringe accounts suggest that the Vikings layered these benches with rushes, straw, or woven mats to add comfort and insulation, turning an otherwise unyielding surface into a surprisingly effective bed. You press your hand against the wood, feeling the faint warmth left from earlier occupants and the slight give of the rush mat beneath. It's rudimentary compared to modern furniture, yet effective in maximizing survival odds. Being elevated also allowed for microclimates within the longhouse. Those closest to the hearth could rely on radiant heat, while the raised platform lifted sleepers above the drafts that snaked along the floor. Small children or the elderly often took the lower benches or even straw-filled corners so that their limited mobility didn't expose them to biting cold. Fringe reconstructions suggest that on particularly harsh nights, families might stack additional straw, hides, or even smaller animals beneath the bedding, creating a multi-layer thermal sandwich. You can almost see a toddler snuggled between a parent and a warm goat, the perfect living heater combo. The platforms also encouraged a subtle hierarchy. Heads of households or more important family members claimed prime spots closer to the fire, while laborers, apprentices, and visitors occupied the less desirable edges. This wasn't merely about comfort, survival was political as well as practical. The more centralized you were, the more access you had to warmth, light, and social oversight. Fringe debates suggest that even these arrangements reflected early Norse social norms, blending domestic functionality with subtle assertions of authority. And there's a touch of humor here. Imagine balancing yourself on a narrow plank while a neighbor shifts in the night or trying to avoid a goat stepping onto your bedding. Yet somehow everyone adapted. You begin to see that these platforms weren't just sleeping surfaces, they were strategic tools, architectural responses to a relentless climate, carefully calibrated to preserve warmth, maintain social structure, and keep frostbite at bay. By the time you settle onto one of the raised benches yourself, feeling the warmth ripple through the rush mat and furs, it's clear that Viking ingenuity extended far beyond weapons and seafaring. It reached right into the very boards they slept upon. As you get comfortable on the raised platform, your attention drifts to the longhouse's subtle network of curtains and partitions. At first glance, these may seem like decorative flourishes, but they play a crucial role in temperature regulation. Strips of woven textiles or animal hides could be hung to create semi-enclosed spaces, trapping small pockets of warmth around individuals or family groups. In effect, these partitions acted like early thermal barriers, keeping heat from escaping too quickly into the room's cooler corners. Historians still argue how widespread and standardized these features were, but evidence from sagas and archaeological sites suggests they were common in wealthier households. The effect is immediate. You can feel the difference between standing outside a curtain nook and stepping inside it. Inside, the air is still warmer and subtly fragrant with wool, smoke, and herbs. Fringe reconstructions suggest that these partitions weren't static. They could be adjusted, moved, or layered depending on the severity of the cold. You might imagine a family tucking children behind a thickly layered hide while adults huddled closer to the fire, their shared heat reinforced by fabric walls. It's a clever system, maximizing limited heat sources with minimal material. These partitions also served as privacy screens. Even in crowded longhouses where everyone shared benches, having a curtained area allowed for small moments of personal space. You notice a young couple or siblings whispering behind a draped hide, protected from prying eyes, while the rest of the household goes about communal routines. Fringe theories even suggest that some partitions were scented with herbs or smoke to ward off insects or spirits, a combination of practical insulation and superstition. You can almost see the flicker of firelight through thin gaps in the fabric, creating tiny, cozy sanctuaries amidst the sprawling, drafty hall. Movement in and out of these curtained areas becomes part of the longhouse's subtle choreography. You watch someone shift blankets, open a flap to check the hearth, or reposition a sleeping child, and the warm air shifts with them. Every adjustment is a small act of thermal management, a reminder that comfort in a Viking longhouse required vigilance, adaptability, and communal awareness. Modern reenactors note that even a single well-placed curtain or hide can raise the temperature in a corner by several degrees, a significant difference when every degree matters at night. And then there's the humor in human behavior. Someone stretches too vigorously, accidentally flipping a hide over a neighbor, prompting a muffled curse and laughter. These minor disruptions didn't reduce the efficacy of the partitions, they simply became part of life's rhythm, an illustration that survival wasn't sterile or rigid, it was lived, messy, and often funny. As you settle fully into the curtained space, feeling the warmth concentrated around you, it's clear that the Longhouse's architecture, textiles, and human ingenuity blended seamlessly, creating microclimates that made nights tolerable in ways that might surprise modern imaginations. Even with raised platforms, partitions, and layered furs, Vikings didn't strip off their daily clothing for sleep, they slept in layers. You notice how tunics, cloaks, and leggings remain on the sleepers around you, each layer serving as insulation against the night's chill. Unlike modern pajamas, these garments were often scratchy, heavy, and sometimes damp from daytime labor, but the weight and density trapped body heat effectively. Historians still argue whether this practice was universal or varied by region and social status, but the evidence points to consistent use of layered clothing as a primary survival tactic. Fringe accounts suggest that Vikings sometimes stuffed extra materials, like straw, moss, or even dried grass, inside sleeves or around the torso to add extra insulation. You can imagine the slight crunch under your fingertips as you settle, the odd aroma of dried moss mingling with wool and smoke. This improvisation reflects a constant balancing act, maximizing warmth while minimizing restriction of movement. Modern thermal studies surprisingly confirm that such additive layering significantly increases retained heat, echoing the empirical knowledge Vikings honed over centuries. You notice the subtle choreography involved. Adults shift cloaks over children, ensuring shoulders and backs remain covered. People adjust tunics and leggings as they move onto benches or under shared blankets. Even the smallest movement matters, an exposed ankle or wrist can rapidly radiate heat into the surrounding cold air. Fringe theories suggest that in extreme conditions, some Vikings may have slept partially wrapped in animal hides while still wearing multiple layers, creating a hybrid of clothing and bedding that optimized warmth. The communal aspect continues here as well. Children nestle close to adults who adjust their garments to create mini heat zones, conserving energy and maximizing thermal efficiency. You realize that warmth isn't a static feature of the longhouse, it's dynamically created through bodies, textiles, and conscious action. Each person's clothing contributes to the overall environment, turning the entire household into a living, breathing heating system. And then there's the humor of it. Imagine trying to crawl under a shared blanket, fully layered in tunics, leggings, and cloaks, while avoiding entangling with neighbors or the occasional goat. Despite the awkwardness, it works. Sleep in a Viking longhouse is a dance of bodies, textiles, and heat management, a nightly performance of survival ingenuity that continues unseen for anyone stepping outside into the freezing dark. You begin to appreciate that every layer, every movement, and every shared shiver is a deliberate choice, honed over generations to ensure that life and sleep could persist through brutal winters. As the night deepens and your body begins to settle, the dynamics of the longhouse crowd become impossible to ignore. It isn't just warmth that people share, it's noise, smells, and subtle social cues. You hear the gentle murmur of conversation, the occasional cough, the scrape of a chair or bench being adjusted, and the soft shuffle of feet avoiding sleeping children or livestock. The longhouse is alive with these minor interactions, a chaotic yet functional ecosystem where everyone's movements affect everyone else. Historians still argue whether such noise was considered disruptive or simply an accepted part of communal life, but there's no question it shaped how Vikings slept. Fringe evidence suggests that families sometimes employed subtle signals, like nudges or whispers, to coordinate movements without breaking the fragile warmth balance. You can almost imagine a mother adjusting her child's blanket with a barely perceptible motion, or an older sibling curling closer to fill a thermal gap. These microactions maintain the equilibrium of heat, demonstrating that survival here was as much about social intelligence as it was about physical endurance. You begin to notice the rhythms of shared living, adults subtly shifting positions, children squirming for warmth, and animals moving in response to human shifts, all choreographed unintentionally yet effectively. Crowding also introduces a strange intimacy. The boundaries between individuals blur, as shoulders brush, knees press, and arms entangle under layers of furs and blankets. Fringe scholars argue that this proximity might have encouraged a sense of psychological security as much as physical warmth. You can almost feel the reassurance of bodies pressed together, the subtle pulses of breathing and warmth from neighbors, creating a communal cocoon against the icy night. This closeness also had practical benefits. Shared heat reduces energy expenditure, meaning individuals could conserve calories while maintaining core temperature, a crucial factor in winter survival. The sensory mix in this crowded environment is overwhelming but comforting. The smell of wood smoke, damp fur, and human presence mingles into a unique signature of longhouse life. Even minor irritants, an accidental elbow, a shifting animal, or a rogue wisp of smoke, become part of the rhythm, a reminder that survival is rarely perfect. You probably won't survive the modern comparison. The sanitized silence of bedrooms and controlled temperatures makes this chaos seem alien. Yet in the Viking context, it is optimal, messy, intimate, and alive. And there's the humor of human adaptation. A teenager rolls over mid-sleep and bumps a goat, prompting muffled groans, while adults shift blankets like silent strategists. Despite these minor disruptions, the system works remarkably well. The crowd, the noise, the smells, all of it combines to create a living heating matrix, a testament to Viking ingenuity and communal survival instincts. By the time you let yourself sink fully into this environment, you begin to understand that warmth in the longhouse is not just a feature, it's a shared, negotiated experience, dependent on bodies, textiles, and the subtle choreography of life under one roof. Your attention now drifts to the smallest inhabitants of the longhouse, the children. They have their own strategies for staying warm, and observing them is like watching a miniature masterclass in thermal survival. Toddlers curl up in corners lined with straw and furs, sometimes snuggled directly against siblings or parents. Older children might nestle alongside animals, using the steady heat of a goat or sheep as an improvised radiator. Historians still argue about how structured these sleeping arrangements were, whether children had designated spots or simply followed instinct and parental guidance, but the evidence shows they were integrated into the household's warmth strategy from the start. Fringe accounts suggest that children often had tiny warmth nests, little patches of layered straw and hides arranged specifically for them. These were not just practical, they also offered a semblance of personal space in an otherwise crowded longhouse. You can imagine a child shifting under a soft hide, feeling the heat radiate from the floor beneath, the body of a parent pressed nearby, and the general warmth of the room enveloping them. There's a sensory richness here that modern bedrooms can't replicate. The textures of fur and wool, the mingling of smoke and animal musk. The constant but gentle movement of life around them. Children's sleeping habits also contributed to overall thermal efficiency. Fringe theories suggest that small bodies were intentionally grouped together to concentrate heat, acting as living insulation for one another and sometimes even for adults nearby. You can picture the microclimate created in these clusters, where the slightest twitch of an arm or shift in position helps redistribute warmth. Modern reenactors confirm that child-sized heat clusters can make a significant difference in a longhouse, helping prevent frostbite and conserving energy for everyone in the room. Beyond warmth, there's a psychological dimension. Children, nestled against parents or siblings, gain reassurance from the steady rhythm of adult breathing and the presence of protective bodies. The low hum of a busy longhouse, punctuated by murmurs, coughs, and soft laughter, becomes a lullaby, a gentle reminder that they are safe despite the bitter cold outside. And naturally, there's the occasional comedic disruption. A child wiggles too vigorously, accidentally nudging a goat, or giggles at the tickle of straw poking through blankets. Even these minor disturbances are absorbed into the fluid dynamics of longhouse life. By the time you trace the movements of children tucked into corners, you start to appreciate how essential they were to the household's thermal ecosystem. Their small bodies radiate warmth, their presence encourages adults to cluster more effectively, and their routines subtly shape how everyone else sleeps. In a longhouse, survival isn't just an individual effort, it's generational, shared, and constantly negotiated. As you watch the youngest curled up beneath layers of furs and blankets, the lesson is clear. Even the tiniest inhabitants play a crucial role in keeping a Viking longhouse alive and warm through the harshest nights. As the children settle, your attention drifts to the softer, quieter aspects of the longhouse night, the stories and sagas whispered by firelight. These weren't just entertainment, they were a subtle form of psychological warmth, a shared ritual that comforted and distracted from the icy drafts. You trudge closer to a cluster of adults seated near the hearth, hearing low murmurs of Norse legends, tales of gods, heroes, and monstrous creatures that once roamed the lands and seas. Historians still argue whether these stories were purely oral traditions or partly performed with gestures and songs, but there's no doubt that they provided both mental stimulation and emotional reassurance during long winter nights. Fringe accounts suggest that storytellers sometimes incorporated sensory elements into the tales, drumming fingers on wooden benches, tossing herbs into the fire to create aromatic smoke, or nudging a child awake to illustrate a dramatic point. You can almost feel the thrill of listening to a saga while nestled under firs, the fire crackling nearby, and the low hum of human and animal life all around. These narrative rituals weren't frivolous, they reinforced family bonds, social hierarchies, and a collective sense of continuity. The mental warmth they provided was as vital as the heat from the hearth or blankets. Stories also served a practical purpose. They distracted children and sometimes adults from discomfort, teaching lessons about resourcefulness, courage, and survival. Fringe scholars note that tales often included advice about maintaining body heat, preparing clothing, or arranging sleeping areas, embedded guidance wrapped in entertainment. You can picture a young Viking absorbing subtle instructions about layering furs or sleeping near heat sources without even realizing it, internalizing survival tactics as part of cultural lore. Even the rhythm of the storytelling contributes to warmth. The gentle rise and fall of voices, the pauses and emphases, create a comforting cadence that coordinates breathing and heartbeats in clustered groups. Modern experiments with group storytelling show that synchronized attention can actually reduce perceived cold, an intriguing echo of what Vikings may have instinctively known. There's also humor here. A dramatic retelling interrupted by a snorting goat or a squirming child becomes part of the performance, a reminder that life and survival were never entirely serious, even in bitter conditions. By the time you let the tales wash over you, you sense that warmth in the longhouse is a multi-layered phenomenon. It's not just fire, walls, animals, or textiles, it's psychological, social, and narrative. Each whispered saga reinforces communal bonds, distracts from discomfort, and turns a drafty, smoky hall into a shared cocoon of heat and human connection. As you imagine the shadows dancing on the walls and the low murmurs of legend weaving through the smoke, it's clear that the Vikings' mastery of warmth extended far beyond practical measures. It touched every dimension of their nightly lives, blending survival, culture, and intimacy into one seamless experience. The next layer of warmth comes from the clever use of fire itself, not just as a source of heat, but as a tool for long-term comfort. You trudge closer to the hearth, noticing how Vikings managed the flames to create zones of varying temperature. Logs are stacked strategically, embers stirred and shifted, small kindling added periodically to maintain consistent heat. Historians still argue how precisely these fires were tended overnight, but archaeological evidence suggests a high level of attention. A poorly maintained fire could mean frostbite by morning. Fringe sources suggest that Vikings sometimes used heat banking techniques, piling embers in insulated pits or behind stones to radiate warmth slowly through the night. You can almost feel the residual heat lingering from these clever setups, radiating quietly into corners where benches and children cluster. The effect is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but combined with textiles, body heat, and architecture, it forms a surprisingly effective thermal system. Imagine a child tucked under furs with a warm patch of embers beneath the bench, gently radiating through straw and wool. It's a tactile lesson in low-tech innovation. Fire placement also dictated social and sleep dynamics. Adults closer to the hearth enjoyed more immediate heat but were exposed to more smoke. Children and the elderly were positioned strategically to balance warmth and air quality. Fringe theories even suggest that the fire was sometimes used to lightly toast bedding before sleep, an ancient version of preheating your bed, maximizing comfort in otherwise unyielding conditions. You can almost sense the subtle aroma of warm straw mingling with the scent of burning wood, a combination that signals both sustenance and safety. The rhythm of the fire is mesmerizing. Sparks rise and fade, logs crackle, embers glow deep red, and the heat pulses outward, interacting dynamically with the presence of people and animals. Modern studies show that controlled radiant heat can be surprisingly efficient at maintaining comfort in drafty environments, which aligns with the observational knowledge Vikings seem to possess intuitively. Humor sneaks in too. A misplaced log rolls slightly, sending a tiny spark onto someone's cloak, prompting a muffled exclamation and a quick shuffle of blankets, minor disruptions that are absorbed seamlessly into the night. By the time you settle back, you notice that the fire isn't just warmth, it's structure, rhythm, and coordination. Each flicker, each ember interacts with architecture, textiles, and bodies, forming a layered thermal network that keeps the longhouse habitable. The Vikings didn't have central heating or thermostats, yet they mastered an ecosystem of heat, combining physics, craft, and social ingenuity. Observing this, you realize that fire in the longhouse is more than survival. It's a performance of human adaptation, a nightly symphony orchestrated to stave off the relentless cold. As the fire hums in the background, your attention shifts to the smells of the longhouse, a surprisingly important factor in the experience of warmth. Smoke, animal musk, damp wool, and the faint tang of dried herbs mingle in the air, creating a dense, living atmosphere. You trudge carefully along a path between benches, inhaling deeply and noticing how these scents contribute to comfort as much as heat itself. Historians still argue whether the specific combinations of herbs, juniper resin, or dried grasses were primarily practical, spiritual, or sensory, but there's little doubt they added a subtle psychological layer of warmth. Fringe evidence even suggests that certain scents were used deliberately to promote relaxation and calm, almost like an ancient version of aromatherapy. Imagine the smoke curling around your face, mingling with the faint, sweet smell of dried herbs tucked into furs or strung from rafters. The result is an immersive olfactory environment, a sensory cocoon that complements physical warmth. Modern reenactors report that even small changes in the aromatic profile, more herbs, less smoke, can shift the perceived comfort of the space dramatically. The interplay of scent and heat also affects sleep. Animals resting on the floor contribute their natural musk, which some fringe scholars suggest might have had a subtle calming effect on children. Combined with layered furs and close human contact, these scents reinforce a sense of security, making it easier to drift into the shallow, interrupted sleep common in longhouses. You can almost hear the collective breathing of humans and animals sinking in the low-lit, fragrant room, a subtle rhythm that forms a thermal and psychological grid across the space. Even humor finds a way into the olfactory mix. Imagine someone accidentally stepping on a patch of moss tucked into a fur, releasing a cloud of pungent scent, prompting muffled laughter or groans. The Vikings adapted to these sensory idiosyncrasies, integrating them into their nightly routines. Nothing was wasted, not even the smells, which became part of the tapestry of life and survival in the longhouse. By now, you start to appreciate that warmth isn't merely heat. It's an entire environment, a synergy of architecture, textiles, bodies, fire, and yes, scent. Every layer reinforces the others, creating a living, breathing system that kept the Vikings alive through some of the harshest winters imaginable. The longhouse is more than a building. It's a multisensory ecosystem optimized for survival, and every detail, from the crackle of embers to the faint perfume of herbs, plays its part in the nightly miracle of human warmth. Your gaze drifts next to the subtle architectural quirks that contribute to warmth in ways you might not immediately notice. Small alcoves, niches, and depressions built into the longhouse walls are more than storage. They create microclimates, tiny pockets where heat collects. You trudge over to one of these recessed areas and feel the difference instantly. The air is slightly warmer, the drafts less pronounced. Historians still argue whether these features were intentionally designed for thermal management or emerged organically from building practices, but their effect is unmistakable. Fringe accounts even suggest that some alcoves were lined with additional straw or furs specifically for sleeping or sitting. Children or elderly family members would often take these spots, benefiting from the compounded insulation of wood, turf, textiles, and trapped body heat. You can almost picture a small cluster of people curled up in one of these spaces, completely cocooned against the longhouse's harsh external environment. The effect is subtle but profound. Tiny adjustments in architecture amplify comfort without additional fuel, an elegant example of low-tech efficiency. These microclimates also created spatial hierarchies. Prime alcoves near the hearth were reserved for adults, elders, or those needing extra warmth, while secondary niches housed children or animals. Fringe reconstructions suggest that families rotated access to these coveted spots during long, brutal winters, ensuring equitable distribution of warmth. You notice the delicate choreography required. Even moving within the longhouse could alter air circulation, forcing occupants to constantly negotiate positioning for optimal thermal benefit. The interplay of alcoves with fire and textiles is striking. Heat radiates from the hearth, pooling in recessed areas and layering with body warmth from furs and blankets. Smoke rises gently overhead, and the scent of herbs lingers, creating pockets of comfort amid cooler zones. Modern experiments with reconstructed Viking spaces confirm that these alcoves could be several degrees warmer than open areas, making a tangible difference for anyone sleeping or sitting within them. And there's the humorous reality. A child wiggling too vigorously or an animal stretching can disrupt the delicate balance, spilling heat into adjacent areas or triggering a minor shuffle of blankets and bodies. Yet this chaos is absorbed naturally into the system, a reminder that survival in the longhouse was part art, part science, and part improvisation. By the time you settle back, the lesson is clear. Architecture itself, from walls to alcoves, is an active participant in maintaining warmth. Every curve, recess, and nook contributes, blending seamlessly with textiles, fire, and bodies to form a living, breathing thermal ecosystem that allowed Vikings to endure the merciless northern winters. Your attention now shifts to the longhouse roof again, but this time with a focus on smoke management, a surprisingly critical factor in surviving winter nights. You trudge beneath the rafters, watching the way smoke spirals upward, weaving through gaps in the thatch before finally finding its way out. Smoke isn't just a byproduct of fire, it's a tool. Historians still argue whether smoke was intentionally used to deter pests or if its primary role was simply a consequence of indoor heating, but its effects on warmth and air quality are undeniable. Fringe accounts suggest that some longhouses had rudimentary smoke channels or deliberately looser thatching near the ridge to help regulate airflow. You can almost imagine a clever Viking tinkering with the roof, adjusting layers of straw to trap heat without choking the occupants. Smoke rises slowly, distributing warmth evenly through the hall, creating a hazy, golden atmosphere that both comforts and irritates in equal measure. The acrid tang clings to hair, skin, and furs, yet oddly contributes to the sensory landscape of nighttime survival. The management of smoke also dictated sleeping arrangements. Those closest to the fire received both warmth and the most smoke exposure, while those further away had cleaner air but slightly cooler temperatures. Fringe studies suggest that some families even rotated positions over the course of the night, balancing comfort, warmth, and respiratory health. You trudge along the platform, noticing the subtle gradient: warmer, smokier zones near the hearth, cooler, clearer air zones along the walls. It's an unspoken negotiation, a dynamic system of comfort and survival. Smoke also interacts with textiles and body heat. You notice how the haze clings to woolen cloaks and furs, creating an insulating layer that slows heat loss. Animals, too, benefit from this effect. Goats and sheep in corners seem less affected by drafts when smoke swirls around them. Modern experiments with smoke-filled Viking reconstructions confirm that subtle layering of heat and particulates can marginally increase perceived warmth, a testament to the Vikings' empirical understanding of their environment. And of course, there's humor in the arrangement. A rogue puff of smoke causes a child to sneeze, a goat to shuffle, and a parent to lift blankets in mild exasperation. Yet these disruptions are minor in the grand scheme. They're absorbed into the living, breathing system of the longhouse. By the time you settle into a comfortable spot beneath the rafters, you realize that smoke is not just a byproduct. It's a partner in survival, a dynamic element woven into architecture, textiles, and human behavior, keeping the night tolerable despite freezing winds outside. As you finally sink fully onto a layered bench, feeling the combined warmth of textiles, bodies, animals, and smoke, your mind drifts to the role of floor coverings in longhouse survival. The ground itself is merciless, frozen, damp, and unforgiving. Vikings understood this instinctively. You notice the rushes, straw, and moss strewn across the floor beneath the benches and in walkways, softening the cold and creating insulation against the earth. Historians still argue how systematically these coverings were replaced or layered, but archaeological evidence shows their consistent presence in both common and elite longhouses. Fringe accounts even suggest that certain plants were chosen for their insulating properties or faintly aromatic qualities, doubling warmth with a sensory dimension. You trudge over a patch of thick moss, feeling its springy texture underfoot, imagining how a child or goat might nestle into it. The floor becomes more than just support. It's a subtle contributor to the overall thermal ecosystem, a passive yet essential shield against hypothermia. Modern reenactors confirm that even thin layers of rushes or straw can elevate the effective temperature near the floor by several degrees, a tangible, low-tech strategy for survival. The layering strategy is fascinating. Some longhouses had multiple strata, rough dirt at the base, a thick layer of straw or rushes, and finally bedding or hides on top. Fringe evidence even suggests occasional sprinklings of sand or ashes to help dry out moisture and reduce drafts. You can almost see the careful hands at work, arranging, pressing, and topping each layer to maximize insulation. The floor becomes a living element in the longhouse, as much a part of survival as fire, furs, or architecture. Movement across the floor is also a thermal exercise. You watch as people step carefully, minimizing contact with colder patches, while children scamper freely, generating heat as they go. Animals wander, add warmth, and occasionally disrupt the arrangement, creating small bursts of chaos that everyone absorbs with practiced tolerance. Humor appears again. A goat's clumsy step sends a straw cascade across the floor, prompting giggles or exasperated sighs, yet the thermal integrity remains intact. By the time you settle fully, the lesson is clear. The floor is not merely a foundation, it's an active component in maintaining warmth. Combined with raised platforms, layered furs, textiles, animals, and fire, this strategy forms a layered defense against the cold. Every inch of the longhouse contributes, creating a carefully orchestrated thermal network that ensures survival even in the harshest winters. You start to understand that warmth in Viking longhouses is holistic, a dynamic interplay of materials, architecture, bodies, and movement. each layer reinforcing the others in a seamless living system. Even with floors layered, benches raised, and fire tending meticulously, Vikings relied on clever body positioning to retain warmth. You notice the subtle strategies unfolding around you. People curling into fetal positions, limbs tucked close to the torso, heads partially covered by cloaks or furs. Historians still argue whether such postures were instinctive or deliberately taught, but they clearly optimize heat retention by reducing surface area exposed to cold drafts. Fringe evidence suggests that certain heat poses were culturally reinforced, especially for children. You can almost see a small cluster of siblings, curled together like a living thermal coil, tiny bodies pressing close, furs and blankets layered precisely to minimize heat loss. Even adults adjust around them, sometimes leaning slightly outward to shield smaller family members. Modern thermal science confirms that curling, clustering, and layering effectively traps body heat, validating what generations of Vikings had discovered through observation and necessity. The positioning extends to interactions with animals. Goats, sheep, or even small cows are carefully nestled to press against humans without creating undue discomfort. Fringe reconstructions indicate that Vikings understood the importance of symmetry. Too many animals on one side could create uneven heat distribution, while strategic placement ensured warmth radiated across the entire sleeping area. You notice the gentle rise and fall of the animals' bodies in rhythm with human breathing, a subtle pulse of life that contributes both physical and psychological warmth. There's also an element of humor and negotiation. Picture a child wriggling too enthusiastically, displacing a goat or nudging an adult, followed by mild groans or whispered commands. Yet these minor disturbances are absorbed seamlessly, demonstrating the adaptability inherent in the longhouse system. Everyone learns to live with slight discomforts, trusting that the collective warmth compensates for the small inconveniences. By the time you nestle into your chosen position, adjusting limbs and blankets instinctively, the lesson becomes apparent. Body positioning is a living strategy. Heat retention isn't just about fire or furs, it's about the choreography of bodies, each movement contributing to a delicate thermal balance. The Vikings had mastered not only technology and textiles, but also the art of sleeping itself, creating a harmonious system where human instinct and communal cooperation turned a freezing night into a survivable, and sometimes surprisingly comfortable, experience. You finally settle into a rhythm on your bench, you become aware of another subtle Viking strategy, nighttime ventilation. It seems counterintuitive, why let cold air in when every degree matters? But the Vikings understood that stagnant smoke and heat could be dangerous. Small gaps in walls, slight roof vents, or adjustable flaps of thatch allowed air to circulate, preventing suffocating smoke while maintaining enough warmth. Historians still argue about how intentional these designs were versus natural byproducts of construction, but the effect on comfort is undeniable. Fringe evidence even suggests that Vikings observed wind direction carefully, adjusting roof flaps or doors to optimize airflow. You can almost see someone shifting a piece of woven fabric over a small opening, blocking a draft from the north while letting gentle warmth rise toward the ceiling. This dynamic approach created zones of varying temperature, warmer near the fire and elevated benches, cooler at the edges, allowing each sleeper to choose a spot suited to their needs. Modern thermal simulations confirm that even small venting adjustments can dramatically improve air quality without significant heat loss. Movement and body heat also complemented ventilation. People shifting, children playing briefly, and animals moving about all contribute to a subtle circulation, mixing warmer and cooler air in a way that maintains overall comfort. Fringe reconstructions suggest that Vikings even used temporary partitions or hanging textiles to guide airflow more effectively, channeling warmth where it was needed most while keeping smoke and odors manageable. You can imagine the gentle rustle of fabrics as someone leans or shifts, a silent dance orchestrated for survival. The humor of these small adjustments isn't lost. Imagine a stray goat nudging a hanging cloth, accidentally letting a puff of smoke escape toward the faces of nearby sleepers, prompting muffled groans and quick, shuffling reactions. Even minor disruptions are part of the rhythm, absorbed naturally into communal life. By the time you lie back fully, the lesson is clear. Viking ventilation was a delicate art. It balanced warmth, air quality, and comfort, integrating architecture, human positioning, textiles, and fire into a holistic system. The longhouse isn't merely a shelter, it's a living organism, continuously adapting to the rhythms, movements, and needs of its inhabitants, a testament to practical ingenuity and communal survival that kept nights survivable in the harsh northern climate. As the night deepens, you start noticing how Vikings managed moisture, an often overlooked factor in staying warm. Sweat from daytime labor, damp furs, or snow tracked in on boots all threat to sap heat, making insulation less effective. You trudge carefully across the straw-strewn floor, feeling the faint dampness in certain areas, and realize that managing moisture was just as crucial as layering furs or tending fires. Historians still argue how systematically moisture control was practiced, but evidence from sagas and Longhouse remains shows that it was a constant consideration. Fringe accounts suggest Vikings used elevated bedding, layered textiles, and even small mats of moss or rushes to absorb dampness before it could chill sleepers. You can imagine a parent tucking a child atop a straw mat, then layering hides and blankets to create a warm, dry nest. Some reconstructions even indicate that special attention was paid to bedding near entrances, where snow or rain could seep in, reinforcing the idea that moisture management was woven into every aspect of longhouse life. Modern experiments show that keeping a dry layer between body and floor can increase perceived warmth significantly, underscoring the effectiveness of these simple measures. Animals also played a role in moisture management. You notice how goats and sheep often choose spots slightly removed from damp straw, while humans create layered zones of insulation to shield themselves from residual moisture. Fringe evidence even suggests that Vikings would sometimes temporarily move animals during particularly wet nights, ensuring that their heat contribution didn't come at the cost of increased dampness. The choreography of bodies, textiles, and animals is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet crucial. There's humor here too. Imagine a small child accidentally kicking damp straw into a neighbor's blanket or a goat shuffling in a puddle, prompting quiet exasperation. These minor incidents don't compromise the system, they're absorbed, adjusted for, and incorporated into the living dynamics of the household. By the time you settle fully, the lesson is unmistakable. Warmth in the longhouse is more than heat alone. Moisture management, like ventilation and body positioning, is an active strategy. Every detail, from textiles to animals to straw placement, interacts to form a living, adaptive system. The Vikings mastered the subtle physics of comfort, understanding that survival required attention to both temperature and dryness, and that these elements could be manipulated simultaneously to keep the longhouse habitable even in the harshest winter conditions. As you sink deeper into the rhythm of the longhouse, your attention turns to the importance of nighttime rituals in maintaining warmth. Vikings didn't just rely on blankets and fires, they had subtle, repeatable practices that prepared the body and mind for sleep. You notice someone carefully adjusting furs around a child, another stirring embers one last time, and the soft brushing of straw to ensure dryness. Historians still argue whether these rituals were codified or simply evolved from trial and error, but their consistent presence across accounts suggests they were central to longhouse life. Fringe evidence even suggests that certain pre-sleep routines involved gentle stretching or movement to keep muscles warm before settling down. Imagine adults lightly rotating shoulders, moving arms, or shifting positions while whispering quiet instructions to children, combining physical activity with social cohesion. These small motions create residual heat in the body, enhancing the effect of blankets and furs. Modern thermal studies confirm that even minor pre-sleep activity can increase overall comfort, validating the empirical wisdom of Viking practices. Another layer of ritual involves food and drink. You notice someone sipping a warm broth or lightly toasted grain, the warmth radiating through their chest and hands. Fringe theories suggest that small amounts of hot beverages were used strategically to raise core body temperature, much like a primitive, low-risk version of modern heating pads. The combination of warm drink, gentle movement, and layering creates a holistic preparation for night, enhancing the longhouse's already impressive survival strategies. There's also an element of humor in these routines. A child spills a drop of broth on a neighbor's blanket, a goat nudges the firewood stack, or someone sneezes from smoke-laden air. Yet these minor mishaps are woven seamlessly into the nightly rhythm. They neither undermine warmth nor disrupt community, they simply remind everyone that life and survival is messy, adaptive, and communal. By the time you settle under layered furs, feeling the residual warmth from movement, drink, and hearth, it becomes clear that Viking warmth is holistic. Survival isn't just a matter of blankets or fire, it's a carefully choreographed combination of movement, ritual, and shared experience. Each act, no matter how small or mundane, contributes to the delicate ecosystem that keeps the longhouse alive, functional, and surprisingly cozy through the long, freezing night. By now, the deeper mechanics of longhouse warmth become apparent, particularly the role of social hierarchy in thermal strategy. You trudge along the benches, noticing how elders and heads of households occupy prime positions near the hearth and central platforms, while younger adults, laborers, and visitors occupy peripheral areas. Historians still argue about how strictly these arrangements were enforced, but evidence shows that social position often dictated access to heat and comfort, subtly shaping the nightly ecosystem. Fringe accounts suggest that positioning wasn't only about privilege, it was about efficiency. Elders and experienced adults served as buffers, radiating heat outward while also overseeing fire management and household safety. You can almost see a small child nestled next to a parent in a central bench, soaking in warmth, while a visitor on the edge of the room relies more heavily on textiles and animal companions. Modern reenactors confirm that strategic human placement within crowded spaces can significantly improve overall heat retention, reinforcing what Vikings intuitively understood. Animals again play a supporting role in this hierarchy. Goats or sheep are often placed near the edges or in between human sleepers, creating heat bridges that help extend warmth to less favorable areas. Fringe theories suggest that families even rotated animals strategically based on nightly temperature gradients, ensuring equitable distribution of thermal benefit. You notice a small shuffle as a goat is repositioned, demonstrating the subtle coordination involved in maintaining comfort and survival. There's a humorous side to these arrangements. Someone accidentally sprawls too far, nudging an animal or neighbor, eliciting muffled laughter or groans. Yet even these disruptions are part of the Longhouse's living system, absorbed without major consequence. Every human and animal body, every bench, furs, and fire is dynamically engaged in the delicate negotiation of heat. By the time you settle into your own position, the lesson is unmistakable. Warmth in Viking longhouses is social as much as it is physical. Hierarchy, human interaction, and body placement are integrated into a holistic survival strategy. The longhouse functions as a communal organism, where each member, regardless of age, status, or size, contributes to and benefits from the intricate choreography that allows life, comfort, and sleep to persist even during the harshest northern winters. As your eyes grow heavier, you notice one final, subtle element influencing warmth: body-to-body contact as a deliberate strategy. You trudge closer to a cluster of sleepers, observing the close positioning of adults, children, and animals, each person nestled against the other to maximize shared heat. Historians still argue whether this was instinctual or a consciously taught survival tactic, but evidence suggests that physical proximity was central to enduring the harsh northern nights. Fringe accounts suggest that families sometimes practiced thermal nesting, where multiple people curled together under a single set of blankets or furs, creating concentrated heat pockets. You can almost feel the warmth radiating from such a cluster, bodies pulsing in rhythm with breath, muscles gently pressing and releasing as everyone shifts. This physical closeness doesn't just conserve heat, it also fosters psychological comfort, reassuring children and adults alike that they are safe in the cold. Modern thermal studies demonstrate that clustering can significantly reduce caloric expenditure while maintaining core temperature, validating the effectiveness of this low-tech, high-touch approach. Animals remain crucial participants. Goats, sheep, and occasionally dogs are strategically nestled into human clusters, adding extra warmth. Fringe theories even suggest that certain animals were preferred for their steady body heat, with goats often chosen for proximity to children or vulnerable adults. You can almost see a young Viking curled between a parent and a goat, the collective warmth radiating through layers of furs and blankets, a living thermal network that leaves no one truly cold. Humor emerges in the logistics. A shifting adult inadvertently nudges a child, who responds with a small squeak, or a goat moves too suddenly, prompting a shuffle of blankets. Yet these minor disruptions are absorbed naturally, illustrating the adaptability of communal sleeping strategies. The interplay of bodies, animals, and textiles creates a dynamic thermal environment, constantly adjusting to maintain warmth. By the time you nestle fully, the lesson is clear. Warmth in a Viking longhouse is a collaborative living process. It isn't just fire, furs, or architecture. Its bodies pressed together, coordinated and adaptive, forming a resilient living system that balances comfort, survival, and social connection. Even in freezing northern winters, Vikings discovered that shared heat, physical, social, and emotional, was a cornerstone of enduring the night. As the night deepens further, your awareness shifts to the longhouse's lighting, or rather, its deliberate dimness. Firelight, flickering and uneven, casts long shadows across benches and alcoves, creating both warmth and a subtle psychological cue for sleep. You trudge along the platform, observing how the fire's glow interacts with textiles, bodies, and animals, offering comfort while signaling the transition from active evening routines to rest. Historians still argue whether firelight was deliberately modulated for sleep, or if dimming was simply a byproduct of ember management, but its effect on circadian rhythm and perceived warmth is undeniable. Fringe evidence suggests that Vikings may have used small hanging hides or clay lamps to diffuse light, creating gentle, targeted illumination near workspaces or sleeping areas while leaving other sections in semi-darkness. You can almost feel the relaxing effect. Soft shadows obscure sharp edges, enhancing the cozy, insulated feeling of the longhouse. This interplay of light and shadow isn't just aesthetic, it contributes to psychological warmth, reducing stress and aiding sleep in a physically demanding environment. Modern studies echo this, showing that dim, warm-toned light encourages relaxation and improves perceived comfort. Light management also reinforces social hierarchy in sleeping arrangements. Elders and heads of household often occupy well-lit, warmer areas, while peripheral spaces remain dimmer, subtly signaling position within the domestic structure. Fringe reconstructions even suggest that small children were lulled towards sleep by the combination of low light and gentle warmth, creating a sensory environment optimized for rest. You notice a toddler nestling into a straw mat, furs layered around them, eyes half closed under the soft flicker of embers. Humor emerges again. A stray animal pokes its head toward the brightest spot, startled by shadows or flickering light, prompting muffled laughter or quiet admonitions. These small, chaotic interactions are absorbed into the nightly rhythm, reinforcing the living, adaptive nature of the longhouse. By the time you settle fully into your dimly lit corner, the lesson is clear. Warmth is both physical and psychological. The interplay of firelight, shadow, and flickering embers reinforces comfort, aids sleep, and enhances the intricate thermal ecosystem of the longhouse. Vikings understood that survival relied on more than just heat. It was an artful balance of sight, scent, touch, and presence, all orchestrated to create an enduring, living refuge against the cold. Now your attention drifts to the subtle role of sound in maintaining longhouse warmth. You trudge carefully along the benches, noticing the low hum of conversation, the rhythmic breathing of clustered sleepers, and the occasional shuffle of animals. Historians still argue whether Vikings deliberately orchestrated sound to soothe or if it was simply a byproduct of communal living. But evidence suggests that auditory cues contributed to psychological comfort, indirectly supporting warmth by calming the mind and encouraging restful sleep. Fringe accounts suggest that soft singing or humming accompanied bedtime, sometimes a lullaby for children or a quiet chant for adults. You can almost feel the gentle vibrations, resonating through benches, furs, and bodies, creating a subtle shared warmth. Modern studies confirm that rhythmic sound can influence heart rate and perception of comfort, indicating that Vikings may have intuitively incorporated auditory elements into their nightly routines. Animals add their own layer of sound. The quiet bleating of goats, the gentle shifting of sheep, and the occasional low grunt of a dog punctuate the longhouse, reinforcing the communal ecosystem. Fringe theories propose that these sounds may have served as gentle reminders of the living presence around each sleeper, creating a sense of shared vigilance that enhances psychological security. You notice a child snuggling closer to an animal in response to the ambient noise, their body heat further contributing to the microclimate of clustered warmth. Humor weaves into this auditory environment. A goat sneezes unexpectedly, causing a ripple of laughter. Someone coughs, prompting whispered admonitions. Yet these minor disturbances are seamlessly integrated into the night's rhythm, illustrating the adaptability of the longhouse's living system. By the time you settle fully, the lesson is apparent. Warmth in a Viking longhouse isn't solely a matter of textiles or fire, it's multisensory. Sound, like light, scent, and body heat, reinforces comfort and security, creating a holistic thermal ecosystem. Every whisper, shuffle, and murmur contributes to a living, breathing environment where human, animal, and architectural elements combine, ensuring survival, rest, and communal cohesion throughout the long, cold night. As your body begins to sink fully into the longhouse's layered warmth, your attention turns to the role of seasonal adaptation. You trudge past benches and alcoves, noticing subtle shifts in furs, bedding, and fire placement that reflect the changing intensity of winter. Historians still argue how systematically Vikings adjusted for seasonal extremes, but evidence from sagas, archaeological digs, and building remains suggests a highly adaptive approach, fine-tuned over generations. Fringe accounts suggest that families maintained separate bedding arrangements for deep winter versus early autumn or late spring, rotating hides, layering extra furs, and even adjusting the positioning of animals to create optimal warmth. You can almost feel the subtle difference as you step from one area of the longhouse to another. Some zones are slightly cooler, others bathed in radiated heat from stacked embers, reflecting careful seasonal calibration. Modern studies on insulation layering confirm that these incremental adjustments can significantly impact survival, validating the Vikings' practical ingenuity. Animals, textiles, and fire all contribute differently depending on the season. Fringe theories propose that in the harshest months, goats and sheep might be strategically clustered with children, while adults nearer the hearth monitor fire and ventilation. Bedding rotations and clothing layers shift subtly, reflecting an awareness of both body heat and ambient temperature. You notice the choreography of movement, positioning, and material use, a living system dynamically responding to environmental conditions outside. Humor remains present. A child attempts to rearrange their furs for maximum comfort, accidentally nudging a goat. A small gust of wind sneaks in through a door, prompting a flurry of whispered commands. These minor disruptions are absorbed into the night's rhythm, reinforcing the adaptability of the longhouse ecosystem. By the time you settle into your designated winter position, the lesson is clear. Warmth in the longhouse is seasonal as well as spatial, social, and sensory. Vikings didn't merely survive winter, they engineered survival, fine-tuning clothing, bedding, fire, animals, and human placement to create a living, breathing ecosystem capable of enduring extreme cold. Each night is a carefully orchestrated interplay of instinct, tradition, and observation, a testament to centuries of empirical knowledge passed down through generations. As the night reaches its deepest, most tranquil hour, your focus drifts to the subtle, almost imperceptible flow of time in the longhouse. You trudge along benches layered with furs, past the quiet breathing of children and adults, past animals nestled in corners, past the lingering scent of smoke and herbs. Historians still argue whether Vikings tracked time at night beyond the changing position of fire embers, but there is no doubt that they experienced a sense of nocturnal rhythm, a tacit awareness of the passage of hours, crucial for survival and social cohesion. Fringe evidence suggests that subtle cues, the cooling of certain benches, the dying embers inside fires, the faint stirrings of animals signaled when to adjust positions, tend fires briefly, or shift blankets. You can almost feel the intuitive knowledge guiding these movements, a parent nudging a child closer to shared warmth, a goat stretching just enough to redistribute heat, a small adult rotation to maintain balance across the longhouse. Modern studies on communal sleep in pre-industrial societies show that such microadjustments significantly enhance thermal efficiency and comfort, highlighting the sophistication of Viking nightly strategies.